Welcome to another episode of Expat Hoops. This is episode 94, and today we welcome Sean McCaw. His pro career lasted over a decade, and he enjoyed it so much overseas, he stayed. He joins us from Germany today to talk about his experiences in his career, as well as what he does today to stay active in the world of overseas basketball. Before we get into the interview, if you like the podcast we bring you, give us a like on YouTube, follow us on social media like Instagram, and of course, we have our own website, expathoops.com, where you can find all of our past and future content. And now we're happy to welcome you, Sean. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So we'll get into this a little bit more later on in the podcast, but you are one of our followers. We follow you. You've got your own stuff on Instagram, as well as all the other things in consulting that you're doing. But we'd be remiss if we didn't say right off the top to follow you at Sean J. McCaw on Instagram as well. But your college career started off at Arizona, transferred to a junior college, finished your last two seasons at Southern Utah. Really good seasons there. It's probably what led you overseas. But if we could get you to talk about a little bit from like your college days to thinking, all right, I can do this professionally, and looking at what that actually looked like for you back then in the mid 90s.
Yeah, it was a different time. And I think back then for me, it started probably towards the middle of the season, my senior year. And when agents started to call, and I sent everything to my athletic department and my coach. I think in total there were about 8 agents that were looking to sign me, and I didn't want to be bothered with it until after the season. So I told my coach to kind of whittle the list down. I trusted him, and he knew what I was looking for. And then, so after the season, it was down to 3. My coach had whittled it down to 3. And I just basically, they flew in, they had lunch, dinner, whatever with me, and we talked. And together with my coach, Bill Evans, we kind of narrowed it down to 1, and that was an Italian agent based in Miami. And that's who we went with. And it was one of the better decisions that I made for my career.
So now, having done some of the consulting with, talking with, athletes now, and you've clearly stayed engaged in the game, what would you say is some of the things that were true then are true now in terms of selecting an agent?
Probably that the selection of your very first agent can make or break a career. I think that stands true. You have to really investigate. You really have to ask questions. You really have to understand what's going on in the market and things like that. And unless you do that, you run risk of having someone who does not have your best interest in mind. I was very fortunate to have someone behind me that really had my best interest in mind. But on the other hand, you never know if you really have a good agent or not unless one of 2 things happens, and they're both bad things. Either you get fired overseas or you get hurt overseas. That's when you know if you've got a good agent or not. And I guess you can say, unluckily, I've had both of those things happen in my career. So that's when you really learn how good your agent is. Getting you a job, negotiating contracts, that's what they do every day. That's their main job, because if they don't do that, they don't get paid. So that's something that every agent is going to do. But knowing how to handle negotiations if you're fired or injured is a huge underestimated factor that you should consider when you have an agent or when you're selecting an agent.
So we're going to get into, unfortunately, those 2 things that happened in your career. But one of the things that, we're kind of talking about now is, the transition from, you've got your agent at this point in time. And one of the things that's really interesting about you, and you talked about this off the pod a little bit, is basically that you're content to stay in Austria. And that's actually where you spent the first 5 years of your pro career, the first 4 with one squad, and then the last one with another one where you do switch teams. But, again, you're staying in Austria. If you could kind of take us through this first 5 years overseas, specifically in Austria, why you were so happy there, both on and off the court.
I'm a very adaptable person, and I've never been one to be homesick or something like that. I think that helped me in the beginning. The plan was not for me to stay in Austria for 5 years. That was definitely not the plan. The original plan through my agent, like I said, he was an Italian guy, and he had a contract for me in Italy, first league team in Italy, making a considerable amount of money. But that was the same year there was the very first NBA lockout. So everything shut down. And so the team pushed back on me because they wanted to see how it would develop with the NBA, and maybe they could get an NBA player. Why take an unproven college kid when you can take a NBA guy? That was what happened. And because I'm a very impatient person, I told my agent after I think it was September, I told him, hey, just get me any job. I just want to play. He said, okay, this is a team in Austria that's looking at you. The money is absolutely horrendous, but they're playing in the Korach Cup, which was back then the Euro League of today. And he's like, they're in the Korach Cup. You're going to make your 25, 27 a game in the Austrian League. You're going to make your 20 points a game in the Korach Cup. You'll have great exposure. And then the next year we'll get you in Italy. Okay, fine. Yeah. Then we come to the first part of those two things about agents with me. 2 months after I got there, everything's going according to plan. We're, I think, undefeated in the league. I'm averaging like 25 a game. In the Korach Cup, I'm also playing well. I broke my leg in a game. Totally changed the trajectory of my career. But then I also learned the first part. You have to have a great agent when something like that happens. My agent, Massimo Rizzo is his name. It was an away game. I had to be transported to my home city to be operated on right away. It was, think Paul George, same kind of injury, same. And I go get emergency surgery. The next day, the team comes in and says, hey, we've talked everything over with your agent. We're keeping you. We're going to pay you. And you're going to sign a contract. If you like, you can sign a contract for next season. And we'll pay for everything. And you just have to stay here in rehab. You can't go home for Christmas. You can't go home like in between. You need to stay here in rehab. And if you're okay with that, we'd like to sign you for 1 more year with the same terms that you have this year. And mind you, I was making roughly $1,200 a month, plus car, plus apartment, plus food. Not a whole lot of money. Austria is not a huge basketball country. And my thought process, sitting in that hospital bed with my leg put up, was, do I go home and have to pay for all my rehab myself? Mind you, I'd only been there 2.5 months. I think I blew through my whole first paycheck. I'm not saving anything, right? I'm a 22-year-old kid. Or do I stay here and take this offer? And I have to say that the club treated me very fairly, because in my contract, in almost every contract, it states more than 6 to 8 weeks, you could be on the next flight home. So they were very good to me, and my agent worked that out pretty much 20 minutes after I got hurt, because they came the next day and offered that. So that's one of those things when you know if you have a good agent or not.
Wow. So you spent the first 4 seasons with that club, and that actually
Right.
gives you a little bit of context for the first couple seasons.
Right.
But take us through like what it was like, having that experience and knowing that, that they did take care of you, that, we're going to talk about the lengthy career that you had. So obviously it worked out. But take us through like the last couple of years after, you've rehabbed, and kind of like what your feelings were towards that club, because, at that point in time, once you're rehabbed, you probably could have made the decision, I could do better, but you wound up staying.
I stayed because I couldn't get better. I couldn't
Oh,
get a
okay.
better
Well,
offer.
that's fair enough too.
So this was the first time I had ever been injured in my whole life. This was by far the worst injury I've ever had, and also since then. So I think somehow it was meant to be like this. So of course, my original idea was, okay, I'm making $1,200 a month. Next year, I'm going to Italy. Goodbye, Austria. That was my original plan. And when I broke my leg, it opened my eyes to how beautiful the country was, how good the people were treating me, everything like that. And I ended up liking it. So I stayed that first year, rehabbed. I started the second year, but I wasn't I wasn't back to normal. I wasn't fit, for sure not. And you have to think, this is a different time. The medical advancements, the training developments that have happened since 1995, that's much better. It's totally different. And back then, I didn't know I could get a second opinion. I was running, I was hurt. So I played my whole second year, I would say, on 65% of my capacity. I was still having pain. And what I learned later was that there was a titanium rod put in my leg to help stabilize it, that it would never break again. My body rejected the metal. My body rejected the titanium rod. I'm playing hurt. I'm under immense pain my whole second year. My leg is swelling up, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm never going to play to the level that I did before. I think as a foreigner, my second year, I was averaging 13 points a game on really one leg, which is not a lot for a foreigner at that time because we only had two. Actually, we had three because we had a naturalized American who is now Austrian. So back then, it was much more dependent on your foreigners to do everything. Your foreigners had to score 25 points or you weren't winning, right? So I had a terrible season, maybe 13 points a game, maybe. I had gone from like 25, 27 points to 13. I played my whole second year, terrible. The club says, okay, Sean, we understand maybe not 100% fit. You didn't have the greatest year, but we're willing to sign you again for 2 more seasons and see how it goes. Again, my agent had a lot to do with that. And it was a turning point for me because then it was like, wow, they didn't just send me home. I played like crap and they didn't send me home. It was a good club. If on another club, it wouldn't have gone that way. But that kind of opened my eyes and changed things for me. And then I stayed 2 more seasons with that club. I have to say, after my second season, the very first practice of my third season, we were on the track. And the reason why I now know that my body was rejecting the titanium rod was the first practice of my third season, we were on the track. And after it was all done, I collapsed. They had to call the ambulance, take me off the field, take me to the hospital. And that's when they realized that all the complaints that I had been having my whole second season was because of the titanium rod. Now, back then, I didn't know I could have gotten a second opinion. I didn't know I could have gone somewhere else and asked. I would say, victim of my team doctor being under pressure from the team actually to play. And had they seen that earlier, then things could have been a lot different. But so I had to get operated on again. They took the titanium rail out and closed me back up. And ever since then, I've been fine. It took me 2 weeks to heal from the surgery. And then after that, I had no more problems with my leg, none, zero. So I stayed for 2 more years, so the third and the fourth season. And then it was time like, okay, let's move on. And I moved to another team in Austria.
Pretty incredible story. On the one hand, you look at the 3-4 years that are spent is something that is unusual, and there's some positives that come out of it, but there's also some negatives. And it's something that is really interesting because your podcast is interesting because, or your Instagram live series is interesting because you're a former player, and a lot of times you'll talk with former players, but that's one of the things that we're just a couple of people that happen to be basketball fans. And so hearing some of these stories, they're always so unique. And so that's one of the things that's been interesting about our journey in doing this podcast. So on the one hand, it's like, you're hearing all this stuff where it's so positive, but then there's the negatives as well. So it's the highs and the lows of it that are so interesting and so captivating. But the good thing is, once you're talking about, it's time to move on with that particular club, you do still stay in Austria. And that's going to be another season that's going to be, you're an all-star this next upcoming season. You win the league. Take us through what that's like spending another season in the same country, in the same league, but now you're on a different club, and obviously it led to some not only individual success, but also team success.
Yeah, it was a weird season. It was a crazy season. On the team that I had been with previously, Kapfenberg, we had never won a title. We were close. I think, the years I was there, we were 3 times third place, and my last season we ended up in second. We lost in the finals, and then I needed a little bit of a change of scenery, and moved on to another team in Austria, and they were hungry for a title. And we started the season really poor. We weren't that good. Then we got a guy that I knew from Vegas who had gone to Arizona State University. His name was Ron Riley. He never really stuck in the NBA. He got drafted, but never really stuck in the NBA. He came to our team. And after he came, then things really got better for us. And the crazy thing is that we won the cup, the mid-season tournament. We won the cup against my old team, and we won the finals against my old team. So I beat them twice for championships in that 1 year, which was also very satisfying. And I'm sorry, I got a quick story. This is a typical European story. So we're playing in the finals. I think we ended up winning 4-2. The deciding game was at our place. And of course, me having played for the other team, Kappenberg, for 4 seasons, I knew everyone. I was very friendly there. I still lived there in the summer. People knew me, right? So, of course, there was a little bit of rivalry going on. And I ended up making the deciding basket with an N1 with, I don't know, 5 seconds to go, something like that. And that gave us the lead and was the deciding point factor. When I made the N1, of course, our crowd is going crazy. The other team, they have a section just for them, and they're disappointed. And I'm hyped. I'm going crazy because I just hit what I assume is the game-winning basket, and I'm going crazy. They called a foul. I'm going crazy, and I just happened to be in front of the other team's section, who cheered for me for many, many years. And I'm going crazy. I'm beating my chest. I don't know. So I'm going crazy. And I look in the stands, and I happen to see one person. I identified one person, and that was the assistant coach's wife. Now, the assistant coach was Bosnian. He had flown. He had gotten away from the war in the Balkans and had settled in Austria. And him and his family. And he was a great guy, and his family was great. I had been over their house to eat many times. Totally lovely family. But I locked eyes with his wife this particular moment, and she's flipping me off. Like, ah! She is totally flipping me off, giving me the bird. I don't know how many curse words in Bosnian she said, but definitely one of those moments that I'll never forget in my life. And later we talked, everything was good. But at that moment, she was so into it that she felt like giving me the bird. Those are how high emotions run overseas.
It's funny and crazy all at the same time.
Yeah.
So obviously a lot of success that year. That's a terrific story, and we're probably not going to do any better, but in terms of actually the professional seasons. But, again, all these relationships that you're talking about in Austria that you've now, at the end of this, you've spent about 5 years, but this is also the period of time where your citizenship changes. You join the national team. Like you said off the pod, you only played for them for a couple national team windows. But take us through that also as well. Now, by now, you've got 5 years experience. You have 2 clubs. Like you said, the personal relationships. Take us through what that decision was like for you to change your citizenship and join the national team.
By the time I was done with my 5th season in Austria, I would say it was time to move on. And I had been there for 5 years. I was fluent in German. I didn't need the national team to the Austrian Federation to get my passport for me. I had been there long enough. And so it was a situation where, of course, back then the rules were a little bit different than now, whereas me getting the Austrian citizenship made me automatically an EU player, and that made me a Bosnian player. So that meant that I could play anywhere in Europe as one of their own. I didn't take a spot away from an American, but I'm American. So that made me very valuable. So by the time I was my 5th year in Austria, I was making pretty good money. It was good. For me, it was good. I've never been a money person, but for me, it was really good money. But once I realized, hey, once I get this passport, I can pretty much double or triple or more my salary. It was like, okay, it's worth trying. And that was my decision. It was the decision to give up my American citizenship, because in Austria, you're not allowed to have dual citizenship. So I had to actually renounce my citizenship. I had to go to the American embassy in Vienna, give them my blue passport, have a talk with them to why I'm doing it. If I'm sure that if I'm mentally stable, that I'm giving up my American citizenship. And for me, it wasn't a problem because I was already living there full time. And I imagined that I would live in Austria or somewhere in Europe the rest of my life. So that, for me, it was clear that I was not moving back to America. So for me, it wasn't a big deal for me to give back my American citizenship. Of course, when you actually go there and you give that passport up, I had to swallow a couple times, but in general, I knew that there was a decision that I was making for myself and for my family, and it was one that I would never regret. I still, to this day, have never regretted. And then I played with the national team for a couple of windows, and that also helped my profile. And I think my next year was in France, in the second league in France, and I more than doubled my salary that next year. So it was definitely financially worth it, and for me as a basketball player to go somewhere else was also great for my development.
Well, and there again, we're also kind of talking about the highs and the lows. We're talking about the highs of going to France, making, like you said, double the money. But that is going to be a split season for you between France and Portugal. And as you
Right.
talked about off the pod, that was the only time you've ever been fired. So, like you said, started off in France, wind up in Portugal. Take us through that season first in France, and the good, the bad, and then how you wind up getting to Portugal.
Well, I was on a very ambitious team in the second league. We were a team in the suburbs of Paris, and we were very ambitious to move up. They really, really wanted to move up. So they threw a lot of money into that team. I was the highest paid player, which ended up being my downfall on the business side. And we had started out pretty well. We were doing well. I think we were in second place. We were definitely on a spot to move up. And then our big guy got hurt. We had an American big guy, and he got hurt. His name is Kyle Miller. He's now a coach in Japan. He got hurt and would be out for months. I don't even know if he returned. And because we needed a big man, I'm a 6'8", skinny 3-man, athletic wing. That's what I was. And we needed a big guy. And I think we tried it a couple games with me on the inside spot, and it just was not, it wasn't a good thing. So in order to free up some money to bring in a big, I was expendable. I made the most money. I wasn't the position that they needed. They came to me, they told me, they were very upfront. We had a great relationship. There was no fighting. I have to say, in my whole career, I've had some incredibly lucky moments, or moments that could have been really ugly that totally won. And they came and they talked to me. They called my agent. My agent called me. And here again, this is when you know if you have a good agent. We played on a Saturday. They called me on Sunday. I think Monday evening, I was on a plane in Portugal. So it happened fast. My agent was aware beforehand. Before I actually got fired, he was aware of it. He did not tell me. Some agents will tell, some agents won't, depending on what they think the player would like. He opted not to tell me because he was already working in the background for another gig. That's how I was on a plane less than 48 hours later. I had all my money. He negotiated a great buyout. Speaking of buyouts, a good agent will get you 3 months' salary. If you're fired, you're not going to get the rest of your money. There's no such thing as guaranteed contracts. It's a bunch of bull, unless you're a EuroLeague guy or something like that. So a good agent will get you about 3 months of your salary as a kind of going away present. I got 4. I got 4 months, and I was only making 1,000 euros less than what I was making in France when I went to Portugal. So actually, I made money out of this deal. he actually got me more money than what I would have ordinarily got. And so I went to Portugal and I played the rest of the season in Portugal. Had a great season in Portugal on one team, and then following year someone noticed me on another team in Portugal and signed me for the final.
It's kind of interesting too. I don't know if this is something that actually does happen in the world of overseas basketball, but one thing with contracts is you sometimes can have offset language. So like if you're fired for something, what they'll do is they'll say, I'll pay you, like you said, if it's the 4,000, 3,000, just keeping the money clean, that basically if you're only making $1,000 less, then the team is only on the hook for the 1,000. But if you're basically making seven off of that, that's fantastic.
Exactly. So I was incredibly fortunate. Like I said, the team that I was on was great. They told me straight up, it's not about your level of play. It is a business decision. I can't be mad at that. That's their right. And that's what I mean. They were incredibly fair. My agent had a good relationship with them. I have to say, it wasn't my main agent that brokered the deal. It was a French agent, because in France, you have to have a French agent. So my agent partnered with a French agent, and the French agent is the one who brokered the deal. He had a great relationship with the club. I didn't cause any trouble. I was a good guy. Everybody liked me. And that's why I think I got more than what was usual. Had I been a butthole, I wouldn't have gotten very much.
The other thing is, I know we're talking about a different time because this is, about 20 years ago now. But one of the things that, since we've been doing the podcast, we've always heard, rave reviews about not only France actually, but also about Portugal. So both of the two countries that you're in during this season, that France is one that is pretty highly regulated, that, there's usually not the issues with money. So it's interesting to see even back then that this is still sort of one of those ones that, again, not only probably your relationship was good, but also that there's a certain level of level that they're conducting themselves, essentially, because there's certain credibility to that league. So that's interesting to hear. But off the court, so this is an interesting one because you spent the first 5 years of your professional career in one spot in Austria. And you say you're just on the suburbs of Paris, basically, and you wind up going to Portugal. Both really nice places to be. Off the court, what were your experiences like there?
Yes. Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. Of course, when I was in Paris, I lived right outside of Paris, but I could see the Eiffel Tower from my window, from my bedroom window. It was amazing. And I've never had so many visitors, so many people from America come visit me, because of course everybody wants to go to Paris and they need a place to stay. So I had people coming in and out the whole year. And so it was amazing to live there, one of the greatest cities in the world. And then I go to Portugal in Aveiro, and great city as well, small, but great, friendly people. And I finished the season there. And then I ended up going to another really cool spot in Portugal on the island of Madeira. And it's the whole year warm, pretty much constant temperature, 80 degrees all year long. They call it the flower, I know it in German. This happens to me all the time. I know the word in German. Island. Hey, I forget my own language sometimes. So they call it the flower island because there's flowers blooming all over the island all year round. And I mean, that was also incredible. I had an apartment right on the beach. Our gym sat right on top of a mountain where you could see almost the whole city. Totally amazing place. I had it pretty good.
Certainly sounds like it. That's one of the things also. It's kind of interesting to see where some of these gyms and arenas actually get placed overseas, and some of the locations that they're in are just kind of otherworldly. So that's sort of one of the interesting things as well. So was there anything in that? Well, I guess it's the first full season in Portugal, but it's the second time you're actually in Portugal that was of note about that particular season.
Okay. Yes. The season that I played in Madeira. Madeira is it's a part of Portugal. It's I don't know, an hour from mainland Portugal, but it's a very small island. And actually they have their own government. And the government is, you could say, is like the main sponsor. So the government didn't always pay on time. So I think I got my very first check on time. And after that, I didn't get another check on time or in full the rest of the season. Now, one might think, okay, if you only got your very first check on time and paid in full? Why would you stay? The reason behind that was we had an American who had been there for 4 years. His name was Ken Roberts. His brother was Fred Roberts, who played for the Celtics. And Ken had played there for 4 years, so he was used to it. And he told us, hey, your money's going to come late. It's not going to be all there. But the good thing about the Portuguese league is you have to show that you've paid all your debts before you get the license for the following season. So he was like, look, 1 month you might get 80% of your check. Next month you might get 40. But at the end of the year, 2 weeks after you leave, you'll get all your money. So I ran with that, and it was exactly like that. Once again, very lucky. At the end of the season, they owed me a substantial amount of money, but I look back on it now and think, hey, they were actually saving money for me. they were doing all the saving for me. And literally 2 weeks after I got home, I had on my bank account the rest of the money that they owed me. So for each person, it's their own personal decision if that's something that they want to go through. But based on what someone who had been there for 4 years, he wouldn't have been there for 4 years had everything worked out, and he was a really good guy and trustworthy, and the people were trustworthy, and I really liked it there, and I was playing well. It was okay. It was okay. You learn the budget, you learn how to get through. And then, so I can remember Christmas, the government shuts down, for weeks. And that's why we didn't get paid, I think, the whole Christmas. But, of course, you got Christmas, you got to buy Christmas gifts, you got, and so I was a little bit worried about that, but you get through it, and it worked out in my favor in the end. I can't really, it was a situation that could have been really ugly, but again, I was lucky and it wasn't.
I think it's also interesting what you're saying is because it's technically sponsored by the Madeira government. I think that's the first time we've ever heard of we've certainly heard of late payments before or that sort of thing, but I think it's the first time before we can actually say, oh, I actually literally blame the government of the country that I'm in.
Yes, and they weren't lying.
Yep. And so it is, like you said, it is one of those things that's fortunate. Sometimes it, like you say, you're very well aware of that. Sometimes it doesn't go that way. That's something that since we started this podcast, we've learned that, unfortunately, that, sometimes the money never shows up. But fortunately that you spent some time in a wonderful place, did eventually get exactly what you were contractually obligated to get. So it's good that you were able to move on. The next season, you wind up going to Germany. Take us through what that was like. As at this point in time, you're already, like you said earlier on, you're fluent in German. So you don't really necessarily have that transition that you have to worry about, that you already know the language. But take us through what that experience was like back in 2002, 2003.
This was a step in the right direction. Germany at that time, even now, great market for players, incredible market. Living here, everything, the conditions, money on time, you're going to have your car, things like that. The gyms are good. Great place to play. And I was going to Oldenburg, EWE Baskets Oldenburg, as an EU player. And at that time, the coach was Don Beck, and he was known for bringing in guys with passports, Americans with passports. That was his specialty. On that team, I can count me, Sean, Castle, Jens, there was somebody else. I think we had at least 5 Americans with passports on that team. Plus we had an American, Tyrone McCoy, who is now coaching in Ulm in the first league in Germany. And we had Elvir Ovchina, who was a Bosnian national team. And we had Anthony Grundy, who was a rookie out of North Carolina State at the time. And so we didn't have very many Germans. We had like 4 young guys who were never going to play, because the rule back then, it's changed. But back then it was EU players, you can have as many as you want. There was no rule that you had to have a certain amount of Germans on the court or on the roster, the game day roster. And so he basically built a team of Americans with passports. And because of that, that was my worst statistical year. I was coming to be an athletic wing, to D up, and be pretty much the last option on offense. And I played the role well, but it was very unsatisfying, of course. I knew going into it what my role would be. I can't say, I was surprised. No, I knew. But of course, no player goes into a situation and thinks, I accept this. I am not going to work hard to change this. But with the team that we had, there was no change. There was no change in my role. But it was that team was probably my second most favorite team that I ever played on in Europe. And the organization was top. Everything was great. It was just for me as a player not satisfying the season, because I'm very ambitious. And so for me, it was a great season, but it had a bad taste in its mouth, sort of. But that was the year that made me realize, okay, maybe I could live here. That was the seed that had implanted, like, okay, I like Germany. This is a great place. I could see I speak German. I think I could live here. I ended up going then after that season to England, but Germany was still in the back of my head.
So that's one of the things we talked about off the pod, and definitely want to get to the British Basketball League at that point in time. But one of the things I think might be interesting, and I'm curious to see, since you played for a team in Germany that was, again, on paper is not American, but it is ultimately. Was there any sort of interesting dynamic in the league about, like, either resentment from other teams' fan bases about basically like, and take us through kind of like what that was like?
Oh yeah, I think that is the reason that season with our team was probably the reason why the German Federation changed the rules. Some rules came in effect shortly after that, and I don't know 100%, but I can imagine that we were the reason, because we literally had 3 young guys that never played. They call them, back then they call the young Germans that never played, they call them bus drivers, because they're just on the bus, then they get back on the bus and they drive home. So we had literally, I think, 9 foreigners. Oh, we had a Czech national team player, Pavel Beka. We had a team full of foreigners, and the Germans just didn't play. And since then, shortly after that, they adopted the 6-and-6 rule, where you have to have 6 Germans on the roster, and the other 6 can be any nationality that you want. They can be American, they can be German, they can be Finnish, they can be whatever. But I think we were hated that year because we were a team full of foreigners in the German First League. And looking back on it, I think the changes that the German Federation made was incredibly good for German basketball. Without it, they would not have won the World Championship this past summer, because the Germans just weren't developing. They just weren't. And our coach happened to be the one that really pushed that envelope. It was within the rules, so he played within the rules, but the rules were not advantageous for German players. And I think that was one of the reasons we got booed. We were not a loved team, even though we were a bunch of great guys. It was a great team. But yeah, I think a lot of people took exception to that, which led to the eventual rule changes.
That was certainly why I wanted to go back to it. Is it certainly sounded, again, like you said, with the rule changes. And that's certainly something, well, like you said, well within the bounds of the rules. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that once everybody figures out, oh, wait, that's an unintended consequence, or it's a loophole, that people are all too happy with it. And like you said, it might be something that in the end was actually good for German basketball ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you mentioned it a little bit before about the BBL. That's where you're going to be spending the 2003 to 2004 season. We talked about this a little bit off the pod, that it's a league that is on the rise. Actually, as you pointed out again, you kind of made the remark that essentially at the point that you went there, it was on the basically almost kind of like the rock bottom before it came back up, that it had been on an
Right,
upward trajectory, rock bottom, and it came back up. But back
right.
2003, 2004, take us through what that was like in terms of your decision, not only to go there after having played in German's top league, to go over to a country where basketball has been kind of interesting, as we talked about it a little bit off the
Mhm.
pod, that it's been something that it's just now kind of getting back on the rise. But back even as recently as 2012, when the Olympics were there, it was still kind of one of those things where basketball was, I don't want to say an afterthought, but it certainly wasn't prominent, and certainly isn't even today. But it's coming back together. But take us through what your experience was like, not only making the decision to go there, but while you were playing there as well.
I actually went there because I was having trouble getting a job. I had a terrible statistical year in Germany. I had been playing before that. I had been playing fabulous. My stats were great. I was not having a problem getting jobs. But after that Oldenburg season, I had for the first time, a real problem with getting a job because my stats weren't as if you looked at the stats, I took a huge dip. So the coach from Leicester, the Leicester Riders, we had played them in a preseason game when I was in Portugal. And that's how he remembered me. And we had always stayed in touch. And he was like, "Oh, maybe one day you'll come here." And then this was 2 years later. Actually, we had kept in touch, and I didn't have a job. And he called me. He said, "Hey, I got a spot. Let's do it." So the money wasn't that great. And at that time, the BBL, the British Basketball League, they were, I wouldn't say it was rock bottom. It was probably on its way up when I came, but a few years before they had a TV dealership, a deal. There was a lot more money in the league. And then without the TV deal, things really fell off. And when I got to Leicester, basketball was popular, but soccer is king. And um, it was just one of those situations that it wasn't as popular. It was, I would say, a little bit wilder as far as what basketball is concerned. It was you had also a lot of foreigners, a lot of Americans. The pace was more up and down. It was more like American basketball than European basketball, if you can understand that. And yeah, and I was there for 1 year because I couldn't get a job. So my thought process was, I'm going to go here. I'm going to get my confidence back. I'm going to get my stats back, and then I'm going to move on. And that's basically what happened. But I had a great year there, fantastic personal year. I got my confidence back. Um, I got to host. I got to host my own show on the BBC radio for about basketball. So that helped my profile as well. I had a really great year there. But compared to what I was making in Germany or the other places, France, or the other places where I'd been, I'd really taken a hit. So I knew I only had a couple more years to play, and I wanted to then eventually make a little bit more money before I stopped playing.
So it's kind of interesting, given especially what you do now with the Euro Step and being on Instagram Live. It's interesting that you say that you were on something with the BBC. What was that experience like in terms of, not only what would you talk about, but what in terms of, you said it increased your profile a little bit. Take us through kind of like what that's like, because I'm not sure that we've ever really had that sort of circumstance. And obviously some of it's because, technology has advanced over time, that people can kind of have these individual accounts where they can get their message out. But being through BBC Radio at that point in time, like, just essentially, what was that like in terms of, like, what was your profile? What would you discuss? Things like that.
It didn't last that long because it was towards the end of the season that I got it. Our coach, the coach that brought me in, ended up getting fired, and it was his show. And then once he was gone, there was nobody to fill it. So they asked me if I wanted to do it, and I did it a couple episodes. It was cool. It was really cool. But it's like you said, it was a different time. So now I don't know if anybody's listening to radio. They're listening to podcasts now. They watch videos, things like that. But I always tell people I played in pretty much the dinosaur age of European basketball. There was a lot of things that were prevalent back then that no longer exist anymore. So that for me was fantastic. It was a great experience, and it led me to what I do now. I think often on that time when I was in England and the exposure that I got, what I learned through those episodes that I was doing that, and it was great. We had other players on. We had I think one episode was just me. It was pretty multifaceted what I did there, and that also then helped me later, years later. I wouldn't have known it, but it helped me later to what I do now as well.
We're going to get to that here momentarily as we're approaching basically the last 4 years of your career. Spent 2 years in Switzerland and then the last two back in Germany. But so Swiss Basketball League, before we get to back to Germany, where you're going to spend so much of your time, not only as a player, but then as a coach, take us through what the play was like in the Swiss League, what your experience was like there as you spent basically 2 seasons in the Swiss Basketball League.
I moved on to Geneva because the coach called me and sold me on the concept, and I had 2 great years. I think we placed second the first year, and also second the second year. We never won the title, but we had 2 good years, and basketball in Switzerland has grown a lot since then as well. Everywhere in Europe, basketball's gotten more popular and more professional. Back then, it was fairly professional. We had a good amount of professional players. Not every team has 12 professional players. You have your foreigners, you have maybe a couple of Swiss guys or national guys, and then students fill out the roster. Or guys that are young guys that are coming up through the program. Germany's a different thing. France is a different thing. Turkey is a different thing. But these smaller markets, Austria, Switzerland, and Holland, Netherlands. These are countries where not every team is going to have 12 professionals, and that's what it was like in Switzerland. We had, I think, maybe 8 professionals. We had me, 2, 3. We had 3 Americans. Well, me included. We had 2 Americans, me, and then an EU player, and the rest were Swiss players. And I think 2 were full-time professionals. So we had roughly 8 professional players, full-time professional players. And it was great seasons, 2 really good seasons. But in the end, I was also in the mode of my career is ending soon. Let me see a couple of places to see where I would like to live. And Geneva was a place that I really liked, but I couldn't imagine me living there. So I said, okay, let me see if I could find somewhere else. And then I got to offer to come back to Germany, where I came back and then eventually ended my playing career and led to me coaching and still currently living.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting one that I think that we're going to be ending your professional playing career. It's, like you said earlier on, I mean, it's throughout the entire thing actually, is that you spoke German very early on. You played previously in Germany. This is you returning to Germany to play. You also alluded to the fact that it's a place that you could see yourself living, and that's what it wound up being. So take us through your last 2 playing professional seasons. This would be about 2006 to 2008. And it actually is a good segue into you were coaching overseas for a period of time as well. So take us through kind of like essentially that it's a period of time that really kind of is putting a capstone on your entire playing career, right, and what would pave the way for what you're doing now.
Right. I came back to Germany and I was, 32 at the time. And I knew I wasn't going to play very much longer. I never wanted to play until I'm 40 or something like that. I was never in the cards. And I wanted to coach. So when I came to Jena, I came back to Germany. We were in the second league. The coach was young, very young. I think at the time he was 24. I was 32 and my coach was 24. He was extremely ambitious. The team wasn't as ambitious as he was, but he felt with the right pieces we could win the league. The club didn't think so, but he did, and that's what he sold me on. And he brought me in to be the old head, the vet, and to close out my career. And we really hit it off. We really liked each other, and we surprised everyone. We shocked German basketball by really winning the second league title and moving up to the first league. So my first year there, we were in the second league. We won the title, and we moved up. Now, Jena is an old former East German city, university city. Many people go to college there, but more of a old school German part of Germany. And lovely city, great people, but basketball wasn't prevalent there, so they were having trouble with sponsor money and things like that. But they scrapped up enough money. If you qualify for the first league, for the BBL, then you got to try it, and that was their approach. Now it's very expensive to have a team in the first league, and there's a minimum that you have to have, like 1.5 in total budget, 1.5 million in total budget, to even start being in the league. But I think we probably started the season with 1.6 million. So like barely in. So we started the season, we were not good. We kept most of the players that played in the second league. And to be honest, we just weren't good enough. Those players were not good enough. And we started the season off. I was playing okay, but we were not good enough for the first league. It was clear. And as a general rule, coaches are hired to be fired. What happens if you are 2-13? The coach gets the axe. Now, the thing was, after the first year that I was in Ghana, it was clear to me that my next season, whether it be in the first league or the second league, that it would be my last year. That was going to be my last year. And because I had such a good relationship with the coach, he asked me if I would come on as an assistant coach when I finished. So that last first league season was due to be my last. And then win, lose, or draw, I would come on to the staff as a coach, as an assistant. Mind you, I had never coached anywhere before in my life. I'd always been a player, never coached. But I had the dream to be a coach. And so we are, I think, let's say we are 2-10. And the manager of the team comes to me and says, hey, we're going to fire Bjorn. That was the coach. We're going to fire Bjorn. We don't have enough money to bring in another coach. We want you to take over as coach. Now, mind you, I am a current player. I am one of the leaders of the team. They're asking a player to conceivably retire and then take over as head coach. So at first I was like, no, that's not how I envisioned my career ending. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. But about 2 weeks later, they kept asking. And we lost a couple more games, and my brother was finally like, Sean, what are you doing? You have no pressure. You've always wanted to coach anyway. It's like you could do it with no pressure. And that conversation was the conversation that changed my mind. And I went to them and I said, okay, I'll do it. I ended up playing my last professional game. No, side note, not my last, what I thought would be my last professional game. I played it on a Saturday in Bonn. Crazy fact, my best game of the season. I gave it all. I left that court I played a great game. But I knew if we lost that game, they were going to let the coach go. And I would be then taking over. So when I left the court, I was crying. Everybody's looking at me like, okay, we lost, but what's up? I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't tell anybody that I was going to take over. So it was like all the emotions came because it was effectively the end of my playing career, such a long 13-year career as a pro, not to mention college and everything what came before that. But that was the end of my active playing career. And I'll be honest, I was scared to death to take over because I had never coached anywhere. And I couldn't tell anyone why. So I was in the locker room crying like a baby. Sure enough, we get back to the hotel. They let him go. And then, so that was on a Saturday. On Monday morning, I'm head coach. The players found out on Sunday. So that was a very unusual way to start my coaching career. I don't know if I would do it again the same way. I think I have a couple of I wouldn't say regrets. I regret absolutely nothing, but a couple of things that I would change if I could do it over again. For example, I didn't tell the coach anything, and we were very close. So when he found out I was taking over, he definitely took exception to it, which I can understand. And we've not spoken since then, which is sad. He's still in Germany, everything, but we've never crossed paths, and we haven't spoken since. And so that's something that I would change. But the actual how it went was fine for me because it started my career. So I ended up coaching the last 15 games in the first league, And now we come to the interesting part. So I think that had never happened before, that an active player retired or whatever and took over a first league team. It's definitely never happened since, and I don't think it happened before. What also has for sure never happened before is, I think the first 10 games or so, I had on a suit. I was normal, nothing. But then we had some injuries. We lost 2 players. Our roster was anyway thin. We lost 2 players to injury, and we lost a player due to drug testing, a younger player on the team that had gotten busted for smoking. And so those were 3 spots that were gone. And we needed 8 or 10 on the official roster, game day roster, and we didn't have 10. So I think the last 4 to 5 games, I had to be in the sweatsuit with my uniform under, because I had to write myself in as a player and as the captain, because I was be the only person that the refs could talk to, of course. And for the first 4 games or something like that, I did not sub myself in. I didn't have to. But we had 1 game against Bremerhaven, and I had to sub myself in because we got in foul trouble. I had a pretty decent game. We went into double overtime. I actually played pretty well, subbing myself in, and I hit a 3/4 court shot to put us into double overtime. That's on YouTube. You can find that there. And we ended up losing in double overtime. And I think one of the last 2 games, I also had to sub myself in due to foul problems. But that's a crazy story that nobody that I've ever heard of could tell. So again, another lucky break that signified the start of my coaching career.
Well, and that's where we go to next. You spent the next close to a decade actually doing coaching, and this is also kind of ties in a little bit with what you were saying in terms of the younger generation of German basketball in terms of development. Your coaching actually kind of coincides with that as well. If you could kind of take us through the period of, like, it's roughly, well, I guess if you really want to start, is 2008, the period of time that you're in the first league, but all the way to basically 2016, you're coaching, and take us through what that was like now that you're done with your playing career. This is a place that you knew that you wanted to be in Germany. Take us through what those several years were like for you.
So because I knew that I always wanted to coach, in Germany, you have to get coaching licenses. It starts with the C, that's the lowest. Then it works up to the B. And with the B, you can coach everything until the first league, so second league down. And I had gotten that, and then by the end of the time, I think my second year in Jena, I had my A license. And the A license, you can coach the first league. I mean, anyway, everything down, but the first league and a national team, for example. I could literally coach the German national team. They don't want me, but I could. My second year in Jena was a turbulent year. I wasn't a good enough coach. We had moved back down to the second league. They kept me on as a coach, of course, and I didn't have the experience. I wasn't a good enough coach. So we came to a point in the season where basically the same thing happened. They came and told me, hey, if you lose the next game, we're going to let you go. We were 500. We were 6-6, something like that. It wasn't that we were horrible, but yeah, it wasn't to the expectations of the club. And I told them, no, if you're going to put that kind of pressure on me as a young coach, let's just resolve this now. Let's cancel the contract from both sides, and that's it. And that's what happened. And after that year, after the year had finished, I needed a new job. I was looking for a new challenge. I wanted to coach. So what I decided was I need experience without the pressure of professionalism. So I moved down to another team called Bayreuth, and I took over their youth department. What that entailed was Germany has a very good youth structure for basketball, where they have the under-19s and the under-16s. And every BBL team, every first league team has to have a team in these leagues. And at that time, Bayreuth did not have a team in the league. So I had to come and work together and build them up to get them a team in the first league or in the under-19s. And that's basically what I did. My first 3 years in Bayreuth is I led the the charge. I was full-time coach there, working with different teams. The under-19 was my premier team, but I did other coaching as well there. And I got to learn. I got to develop my own philosophy without any pressure. I could do whatever I wanted. So I had a really great group of guys, of young guys that wanted to learn, and they ran through a wall for me. It's my favorite team that I ever coached. And they were great for my development. I tried stuff out, stuff worked, some stuff didn't work. And these guys were hungry and they wanted to learn. So it allowed me to develop as a coach, even though it was in youth, but it was a very high standard of youth basketball. And I could really develop my own style. Then after those 3 years in Bayreuth, I started to think, okay, I want to coach pros again. I want to be a first league coach. I have a first league license. That's where I want to be eventually. But I was willing to take the steps necessary. I had never been an assistant. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go to another team in Germany that was in the second league as an assistant. What I learned through that experience was I'm a leader. I would say a natural born leader. And I don't think I really liked being an assistant, or at least not in that situation. The head coach was only 25 years old. They brought me in to kind of mentor him. And in that kind of situation, that wasn't for me. That definitely wasn't for me. So I decided to move on after that season. And I took another job with a BBL team, but with the youth department in Braunschweig, where I currently still live. And it was basically the same thing, under 19s, under 16s, and developing the youth. And that's where I realized in those two jobs, in Bayreuth and in Braunschweig, that's where I realized how important the youth development is and how important it is to have good coaches in these jobs and how it's much different than in America. So that's how I developed as a coach. And then after the 3 years that I stayed in Braunschweig, that's when I decided, okay, do I really want to do this anymore? I was not sure if I really wanted to coach again on a higher level. And I made a deal with my wife that if I could find another job that would pay me well, our standard of living, I didn't have to make $1 million or something like that. But if it was a job that would be good for our family situation, then I would take it instead of going to another BBL club, because I did have one offer as an assistant in another BBL club. And as fate would have it, 2 weeks later, I had a job at an international school here, and I had to fulfill my promise to my wife and take that job. And I stopped coaching, and I've never looked back. And it was one of the absolute best decisions of my life to stop coaching and to get the job at the school where I'm at. I've been here almost 8 years, and fantastic. And that was my way out of coaching, out of basketball, but I don't regret it in one instant.
But you still have your toe kind of in the water, though.
Yes.
You've got several things going on, which is as we mentioned before earlier on the podcast, the Eurostep Instagram series that basically appears, and we pop in on it from time to time whenever we get the notifications. So again, make sure you're following him at Sean J. McCaw. That way you get the notifications when he's going live. Some of our guests, I think, have actually probably even been crossovers. But there's a unique style that you have, and certainly a unique experience that you bring to it. But you're also doing consulting, which is your website, SeanJMcCaw.com. And you have previously written a book, and you've got another one coming out. So take us through kind of exactly what your role is now. Obviously, you just talked about your day job, but take us through exactly what those entail. And I would imagine we're probably going to get into a lot of the previews for the new book on one of our extras, so make sure you stick around for that. But take us through basically all the hats that you wear today in addition to your day job.
Well, it started, I needed a break. When I decided, okay, I'm going to get out of coaching, I needed a break because my whole life had been centered around basketball. And I really took literally 4 years off where I did not go to games. I didn't watch it on TV. I was totally out of basketball other than talking to my coaching buddies and things like that. That was it. And then Corona hit. And I had more time on my hands. And my best friend was here. Shout out to you, Seb. Thank you, brother. My best friend was here visiting, and I had written this book called Same Name, Different Game many years before. It's a guide for someone who's like a senior in college to walk them through one whole year of what to expect if you want to play overseas, how agents contact you, or if you have to contact agents, selecting how do you select an agent, and then let's say you got a job, you fly over, what to expect on and off the court, and it pretty much walks you through a whole year of your rookie season till the end of your year as a rookie, and kind of walks you through the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it has stories from my career in that. And this is the book, Same Name, Different Game. You can find it on Amazon, by the way. And yeah, and he told me, why don't you rewrite your book? Why don't you do your book? Because back when I originally wrote it, publishing was not a thing. It was non-existent. And because my book is such a niche book, no publishing houses wanted it. I tried it. I tried to publish it through publishing houses, and no one wanted it. So I said, okay, let me give this Amazon thing a try. And I rewrote it. I had to update it. I had to do some more interviews. I had to change some things. Some things had changed over time. And I brought it out. I self-published it on Amazon. And that was kind of the kickstart back into basketball. The book came out, very well received. And then people started to contact me. First per email, via email. And then I said, okay, let me try Instagram. I wasn't on Instagram at that point. Let me try Instagram and see if I can reach more people. And then it kind of snowballed. And through the very first book, Same Name, Different Game, it really got me back into basketball without being technically in, because I was able to do what I do normally. I'm an educator. And I could teach people the ins and outs of European basketball, which I only know of one person that does it sort of in the realm that I do it. But I think one of my advantages is I was the first. And secondly, I live in Europe still. If I don't know something, I've seen it all. But if I don't know something, I have friends that are agents. I have friends that are coaching. I can ask, I can call, I'm here. I'm right on the pulse of everything going on in Europe. And from that side, I'm pretty much the only person that does it in the form that I do it. And my passion is anyway to educate. And so it's turned into my passion into now a budding business. I call it my passion work. It's not, I wouldn't call it a side gig. It's not, it's more than that. It's passion work. And now people are reaching out to me. I have a total system behind everything. I do mentoring. I mentor only people that are in a season. I can't mentor you if you're home, but I can get you through a season. I can tell you, I can help you. You have a bad game, you call me up, say, Sean, I had a bad game. Okay, let's talk about it. What went right? What didn't go well? Let's look at a little bit of film. That's the mentorship. But then there's also the side of advising, where if you have never played overseas before, you have no idea what you're getting into. So you need to ask questions. And I am the sounding board for those people that need the how-tos, that maybe don't have an agent or have never played overseas, things like that.
Almost kind of sounds like a basketball therapist at times too.
Yes, it is. It is.
Sean McCaw, thank you for being a guest on the pod today and talking to us about your career overseas. Reminder to find him at his website, SeanJMcCaw.com. Also, you can find the Eurostep in his Instagram handle at Sean J. McCaw. But again, thank you for sitting down with us here today on Expat Hoops. Really enjoyed talking to you, Sean.
No problem. I'm glad now I am a part of what you do, because I really appreciate what you guys do for the European or the overseas community.
And we're actually going to likely talk about that a little bit in our extras. So make sure that you all watch those as well here on our YouTube channel. Hello, and thanks for watching. Be sure to give the video a like, and you can watch more videos over here. You can also click subscribe over here so you're notified when we have new content here on Expat Hoops.